The military transport ship descended through the pale orange clouds of Vareth Prime, and inside its cargo hold sat 38 recruits from across the galaxy, each one representing the deadliest warriors their homeworld could offer, each one selected through brutal competition and genetic screening to join the most elite training program the Galactic Coalition had ever created. Commander Valeth stood at the observation window of the Academy's landing platform, watching the ship approach with all four of his compound eyes focused on the vessel, his massive insectoid body casting a long shadow across the polished metal floor as the morning sun rose behind him. He had reviewed every file, memorized every species profile, and prepared individualized training regimens for each recruit based on their natural abilities and their homeworld's combat traditions. The Vornkai would need specialized blade training to maximize their 4 ceremonial arm blades that could cut through starship hulls like paper. The Vesic required bonding chambers for their living armor, symbionts that fused with their nervous systems and made them nearly invincible. The crystalline hegemonies representative would need pressure-controlled environments to prevent their silicon-based bodies from shattering under stress. Every species had been accounted for, every need anticipated, every potential maximized through careful planning and centuries of accumulated knowledge. Then there was the human. Valeth clicked his mandibles in what his species recognized as irritation as he pulled up her file once more on his personal display, scrolling through the sparse information that Earth's newly established embassy had provided. Specialist Elena Vasquez, age 27, standard cycles, former member of something called the Marine Corps, which appeared to be a basic planetary defense force. No notable genetic modifications, no cybernetic enhancements, no natural weapons of any kind. She was a diplomatic formality, nothing more and nothing less. The Coalition had made first contact with humanity only 3 standard years ago, and protocol demanded that all member worlds receive representation in the Academy's programs regardless of their species. Apparent combat potential. It was a waste of resources, Valeth thought, but politics often demanded such compromises. The transport ship touched down with a gentle hiss of landing thrusters, and the cargo ramp lowered to reveal the recruits standing in perfect formation. A stunning display of galactic diversity that never failed to impress even a veteran like Valeth. Saw the towering Vornkai warriors with their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming under the artificial lights, their compound eyes scanning the unfamiliar environment with predatory alertness. He saw the Vesic rippling with barely contained aggression, their symbiont armor pulsing with bioluminescent warnings that signaled their readiness for combat. He saw the crystalline being from hegemony space refracting light through its geometric body like a living prism, beautiful and deadly in equal measure, and at the very end of the formation, looking almost comically out of place among these galactic predators, stood the human. Elena Vasquez was small by most standards, standing barely 5 feet and 8 inches tall, with brown skin and dark hair pulled back in a tight knot behind her head, her eyes a deep brown that seemed unremarkable compared to the glowing orbs and multifaceted lenses of her fellow recruits. She wore a simple gray jumpsuit with no armor, no visible weapons, no equipment of any kind beyond a small pack slung over one shoulder. Valeth's assistant, a nervous amphibian named Golric, shuffled up beside him with a datapad clutched in his webbed fingers. "Commander, I have prepared the remedial protection modules for the human, as you requested," Golric said in his wet, bubbling voice. "She will require extensive shielding if she is to survive even the basic orientation exercises. And I have also requisitioned medical supplies specific to her biology in case of injury, which I anticipate will be frequent." "Good," Valeth replied without looking away from the recruits. "Assign her to the support track and keep her away from the combat simulations. until we can assess whether she has any useful skills at all. Perhaps she can assist with logistics or communications, of course. Commander, the recruits marched down the ramp in perfect synchronization, their footsteps creating a thunderous rhythm against the metal plating. And Valeth stepped forward to deliver his traditional welcome address. "Recruits of the Galactic Coalition," he announced, his voice amplified by the translation systems embedded throughout the platform. "You stand at the threshold of the most demanding training program in known space. And many of you will fail, many of you will break, and some of you may die, but those who survive will become the elite warriors who protect our civilization from threats beyond imagination." His compound eyes swept across the formation. Noting how each recruit reacted to his words, the Vornkai stood taller with pride, their arm blades extending slightly in anticipation of glory. The Vesek's armor pulsed faster with excitement and aggression barely contained beneath their biological shells. Crystalline being chimed with harmonics that indicated eager acceptance of the challenge ahead, and the human just stood there with a small smile on her face, an expression that Valeth's cultural database identified as either nervousness or amusement. Though he could not determine which, "You will be tested in ways you cannot imagine," Valeth continued. "You will face simulated combat against the deadliest predators from 1,000 worlds. You will navigate environmental hazards that have killed entire expeditions. And you will push your bodies and minds beyond all known limits." He paused for effect, allowing his words to sink in before delivering the final warning. "The Crucible Arena awaits you, and it shows no mercy to the weak." The recruits were dismissed to their quarters, and Valeth watched them file away in orderly lines, his attention lingering on the human as she walked beside the massive Vonkai warrior who towered over her like a building. She should have been intimidated, terrified even, surrounded by beings who could tear her apart with casual ease. Instead, she walked with a relaxed confidence that Valeth found deeply puzzling, her shoulders loose and her stride steady, as if she were taking a pleasant stroll rather than entering the most dangerous military facility in the quadrant. "Commander," Golrek said hesitantly, "I noticed something unusual in the human's medical records." "What is it?" "Her species apparently has an unusually high pain tolerance compared to most carbon-based life forms. And there are references to something called adrenaline, which seems to temporarily suppress injury responses and enhance physical performance." Valeth waved a dismissive limb. "Interesting, but ultimately irrelevant. No amount of pain tolerance will compensate for her lack of natural weapons or armor. She is simply too fragile for real combat." "Of course, Commander. You are certainly correct." But as Valeth turned away from the landing platform, he could not shake the image of that small smile from his mind. And somewhere in the depths of his ancient warrior instincts, a tiny voice whispered that perhaps he was missing something important. He ignored it, because surely there was nothing special about humans at Alin, her assigned quarters that night. Elena Vasquez unpacked her small bag and examined the room with tactical precision, noting the exits and the ventilation shafts and the structural weaknesses. In the walls, she had read the briefings about the Academy and its reputation for breaking recruits from even the most dangerous worlds in the galaxy. She had seen how the aliens looked at her with pity or amusement or dismissal. In their strange and varied eyes, she had heard Commander Valeth's words about the weak and the strong, and who would survive the trials ahead. Lena smiled again, the same smile that had puzzled the instructors, and she began her evening exercise routine with push-ups and sit-ups and shadowboxing that would have seemed primitive to anyone watching, but no one was watching. And that was exactly how she liked it. Let them underestimate her. Let them dismiss her. Let them prepare their remedial protection modules and their medical supplies. Elena Vasquez had grown up on a world where everything wanted to kill you, where the air itself could poison you, and the water could drown you, and the animals could eat You and even the plants could make you sick. She had survived training that broke most humans who attempted it. And she had fought in conflicts that the Coalition had never heard of and would probably never understand. The aliens thought she was weak because she had no claws or venom or armor. They had no idea that humans had something far more dangerous than any natural weapon. They had the refusal to quit, the willingness to suffer, and the creativity to turn anything into a tool of survival. Alina finished her exercises and lay down on the unfamiliar bed, closing her eyes with a smile still playing on her lips. Tomorrow would be interesting, and she could not wait to show them what humanity was really made of. The morning alarm echoed through the academy corridors like the scream of some dying beast, and recruits from 37 different worlds stumbled from their quarters with varying degrees of alertness and confusion. Some already fully armored, and others still adjusting to the artificial gravity that felt wrong to bodies evolved under different stars. Elena was among the first to reach the assembly hall, her body already warmed up from an hour of exercises that she had completed before the alarm even sounded. Her muscles loose and her mind sharp and focused on the day ahead. The other recruits gave her strange looks as they filed into formation, their alien eyes filled with curiosity and condescension and something that might have been pity. She ignored them all and stood at attention with perfect military discipline, her spine straight and her eyes forward and her breathing slow and controlled. Instructor Morath entered the hall with heavy footsteps that shook the floor beneath his massive weight, his arachnoid body towering over even the tallest recruits as he surveyed them with 8 gleaming eyes that missed nothing. He was a veteran of 3 major wars and countless smaller conflicts, and his body bore the scars of battles that had killed lesser warriors. Deep gouges in his chitinous armor, where energy weapons had burned through, and jagged lines, where bladed weapons had failed to find vital organs. Today, you face your first evaluation, Morath announced, his voice a deep rumble that the translation system struggled to render properly. The Crucible Arena will test your combat abilities against simulated threats, and your performance will determine your placement in the training tracks. He began pacing along the formation, stopping occasionally to examine individual recruits with his cluster of eyes. Before you enter the arena, you must visit the armory and select your equipment, and you will find weapons and armor suited to every known combat style and biological configuration. So choose wisely, because your survival depends on it. The recruits marched in orderly lines toward the armory, a massive chamber filled with more weapons than Elena had ever seen in one place. Racks upon racks of killing tools stretching from floor to ceiling and disappearing into the shadows above plasma. Lances hummed with contained energy that can vaporize organic matter in an instant. Kinetic accelerators gleamed with deadly promise, their magnetic coils capable of launching projectiles, and a fraction of light-speed neurotonic dispensers bubbled with poisons tailored to affect every known form of biochemistry. In the galaxy, hard light shields flickered with energy fields that could stop almost any attack. Elena watched the other recruits approach the weapon racks with familiarity and confidence, selecting tools that matched their natural abilities and their homeworld's warrior traditions. The Vonkai warrior named Kethrol chose a set of enhanced arm blade attachments that would amplify the cutting power of his natural weapons by a factor of 10. The Desic competitor wrapped herself in an advanced symbiont armor that merged with her existing biological shell and added layers of reactive protection. The crystalline being selected a resonance amplifier that would focus its natural ability to generate destructive harmonic frequencies into a weapon of terrible power. One by one, the recruits made their selections and moved toward the arena entrance, their arms full of equipment and their bodies bristling with weapons. Elena walked past every rack without stopping. She examined the plasma lances and found them Interesting but unnecessary. She looked at the kinetic accelerators and appreciated their engineering, but left them where they stood. She passed the neurotoxin dispensers and the hard light shields and the countless other tools of destruction that the coalition had accumulated over millennia of warfare, and she selected nothing at all. Instructor Morith noticed her empty hands as she approached the arena entrance, and he moved to intercept her with a speed that seemed impossible for a creature of his size. "Specialist Vasquez," he said, his 8 eyes focusing on her with uncomfortable intensity. "You have not selected your equipment." "That is correct, Instructor. The evaluation pits you against a Class 4 combat simulation, featuring autonomous drones and environmental hazards and hostile fauna projections. And you cannot possibly survive such threats without proper armament." Elena met his gaze without flinching, her brown eyes steady and calm as she faced down a predator that could crush her with a single limb. "I do not need any weapons." Morith's chelicerae clicked together in what the translation systems identified as disbelief mixed with growing alarm. "That is not acceptable, Specialist. You must select at least a basic defensive loadout, or you will be killed within moments of entering the arena. Is there a regulation that requires me to carry weapons?" The question caught Morith off guard, and he paused to consult his internal database, searching through countless rules and protocols that governed the Academy's operations. Silence stretched for several seconds as other recruits stopped to watch the confrontation, their alien eyes filled with curiosity about the strange human who seemed determined to commit suicide. "There is no explicit regulation," Morith finally admitted, "because no species has ever required such a rule. And the idea that anyone would voluntarily enter combat unarmed is simply beyond comprehension. Then I am within my rights to proceed. This is madness. Specialist Vasquez, you are a soft-skinned mammal with no natural weapons and no defensive capabilities. And you are choosing to face threats that have killed armored warriors with decades of experience." Elena smiled, the same small smile that had puzzled Commander Valith on the landing platform, the same expression that the aliens consistently misinterpreted as nervousness or confusion. "I appreciate your concern, Instructor, but I know exactly what I am doing." She stepped past him and walked through the arena doors with nothing but her standard-issue jumpsuit and her bare hands. Morith stood frozen for a moment, his ancient warrior instincts screaming warnings that his rational mind could not fully comprehend. And then he rushed to the observation deck where Commander Valith and the other instructors were already gathering. "Commander," Morith said as he burst into the room, "we have a situation with the human." Valith turned from the monitoring screens with irritation in his compound eyes. What kind of situation could the human possibly cause? She is the least threatening recruit we have ever admitted. She entered the arena unarmed. The words hung in the air like poison gas, and every instructor in the room turned to stare at Morith with expressions of shock and horror. "That is not possible," said a feathered instructor from a world of aerial predators. "No sane being would enter the crucible without weapons. I tried to stop her, but there is no regulation that forbids it." Valith felt his blood run cold, a sensation he had not experienced since his first taste of real combat nearly 2 centuries ago. And he moved to the primary monitoring station with sudden urgency. "Pull up everything we have on humans," he ordered. "Their homeworld classification, their evolutionary history, their biological capabilities, everything the Coalition has gathered since first contact." "Commander, is that really necessary?" "Ask Gorek. She's just one human, and surely she will simply fail the evaluation and be reassigned to a support role. Do it now." The harsh tone silenced all other conversation, and the instructors gathered around the screens as data began flowing across the displays. EA-RTH Soul System Classification. Category 12, Death World, under review. Category 12. whispered one of the instructors. "That cannot be right. Those classifications are reserved for worlds where sentient life should be impossible." More data scrolled across the screens, each line more disturbing than the last. Atmospheric composition: 21% free oxygen, highly reactive and corrosive. Gravity: 1G standard, high for carbon-based life development. Axial tilt: 23 degrees, extreme seasonal variation. Hydrosphere: 71% surface water, drowning hazard omnipresent. Biological threat assessment: extreme. The instructors read in silence, their various forms of eyes growing wider with each new piece of information. Their world has active plate tectonics that cause massive earthquakes and volcanic eruptions on a regular basis, Morith said, reading from the geological data, and they consider this normal. Their atmosphere generates electrical storms that can kill instantly, added the feathered instructor, and their young play outside during these events. Their dominant predators include creatures that can run faster than most vehicles and bite through bone like it was soft fruit, said another. And humans hunted these creatures to near extinction before developing advanced technology. Valith stared at the screens with growing horror as the true nature of humanity began to reveal itself. These soft-skinned mammals were not the weak and harmless creatures he had assumed them to be. They were survivors of one of the most hostile environments in the known galaxy, forged by millions of years of evolution in a world that tried to kill them every single day. And one of them had just walked into his arena without weapons, because she did not believe she needed any. By the first hive, Valith whispered, "What have we let into our academy?" On the monitoring screens, Elena Vasquez stood in the center of the arena floor. Waiting calmly for the simulation to begin, she stretched her neck from side to side and rolled her shoulders loose and cracked her knuckles with a series of small popping sounds, and she smiled. The first combat drone activated with a whine of energy weapons powering up, and the instructors held their breath as they watched what they expected to be a very short and very fatal evaluation. They were about to learn how wrong they could be. The first drone came at Elena like a bolt of lightning, its sleek metallic body cutting through the air with precision that would have impressed any engineer in the galaxy. Its weapon systems already charging with energy that could burn through STANDARD armor plating. Elena did not run away from it. She ran toward it. The instructors in the observation deck gasped in unison as they watched the human close the distance between herself and the deadly machine. Her body moving with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for a species without enhanced musculature or neural acceleration. The drone fired its primary weapon, a beam of concentrated plasma that left a glowing scar on the arena floor where Elena had been standing a fraction of a second earlier. But she had already moved, her body twisting sideways in a maneuver that the tactical computers flagged as statistically improbable. How did she know where it would fire? Demanded Morth, his 8 eyes fixed on the screens with intense focus. Her species has something called predictive visual processing, Kilrek said, scrolling through the human biology files with trembling webbed fingers. They can track moving objects and calculate trajectories based on subtle environmental cues. And it appears to be an evolved hunting adaptation. Elena reached the drone before it could fire again. And what happened next would be replayed in Academy classrooms for generations to come. She grabbed the drone's weapon arm and twisted it with her entire body weight, using leverage and momentum instead of raw strength to redirect the machine's next shot into its own propulsion system. The drone sputtered and sparked and crashed to the ground in a heap of damaged circuitry. And Elena was already moving toward the next threat before it had finished falling. That was not luck, Vela said quietly. That was trained combat skill applied to an unfamiliar opponent. The second and third drones activated simultaneously, flanking Elena from opposite directions in a classic pincer maneuver that had proven effective. Against warriors far more heavily armed than she was, Elena dropped flat to the ground as both drones fired, their plasma beams crossing through the space where her torso had been and striking each other's shields. Instead, she rolled sideways, grabbed a chunk of debris from the first destroyed drone, and hurled it at the nearest machine with an overhead throwing motion that generated surprising velocity. The improvised projectile struck the drone's sensor cluster and shattered it into fragments, blinding the machine and sending it spiraling into a wall. Did she just use a piece of garbage as a weapon? Asked the feathered instructor with disbelief coloring his translated voice. Humans apparently have an unusual ability to recognize potential tools in their environment, Ulrich reported. Still reading from the database, their ancestors survived by adapting found objects into weapons and shelters and devices, and this trait appears to be deeply ingrained in their cognitive processing. The fourth drone learned from its predecessors and maintained distance, peppering Elena with suppressive fire that forced her to take cover behind a fallen structural column. The observation deck went silent as they watched her crouch behind the inadequate protection, plasma bolts chipping away at the metal inches from her exposed flesh. She is pinned, Marth observed. The drone has superior firepower and position, and she has no way to close the distance without being hit. But Elena was not waiting for rescue or hoping for the simulation to end. She was examining her surroundings with quick, precise glances, her brain processing information and generating solutions at a body's speed that would have impressed the Academy's tactical computers. She found what she was looking for in the form of a damaged power conduit hanging from the ceiling, its exposed wiring sparking with residual energy. Elena timed the drone's firing pattern, counting the milliseconds between shots, and then she moved. She sprinted from cover and leaped onto the fallen column, using it as a springboard to launch herself toward the hanging conduit, her fingers closing around the wiring as plasma fire scorched the air beneath her. Swinging feet, the drone adjusted its aim upward, tracking her movement with mechanical precision. But Elena was faster. She ripped the conduit free from its housing and hurled it like a javelin, the sparking wires trailing behind it like the tail of a comet. And the improvised weapon struck the drone's chassis and discharged its stored energy directly into the machine systems. The drone died in a shower of sparks and smoke, and Elena dropped to the ground with a roll that absorbed the impact of her fall. Unbelievable, whispered one of the instructors, but the simulation was far from over. The arena's environmental hazard module activated with a low rumbling sound, and sections of the floor began shifting and reconfiguring into new patterns, creating a maze of obstacles and traps designed to test a warrior's adaptability and endurance. Toxic gas began seeping from vents in the walls, a neurotoxin specifically calibrated to incapacitate carbon-based life forms within seconds of exposure. She will need to find the safe zones quickly, Morris said. The gas concentration will reach lethal levels within 2 minutes. Elena did not look for safe zones. She took 3 deep breaths, hyperventilating to saturate her blood with oxygen. And then she held her breath and ran directly into the thickest cloud of poison. What is she doing? Valeth demanded. She is running into the gas instead of away from it, Commander. The human database indicates that their species can hold their breath for extended periods under stress, Ulrich said with growing excitement in his voice. Their diving reflex allows them to function without oxygen intake for several minutes, and their bodies can tolerate brief exposure to many toxins that would kill other species instantly. Elena burst through the gas cloud on the other side with bloodshot eyes and tears streaming down her face. Her skin flushed red from the irritation, but her body still moving with determined purpose. She had calculated that the shortest path to the next objective was through the hazard rather than around it. And she had trusted her body to survive what would have killed most beings in the galaxy. The Predator simulation activated next, and a holographic projection of a Class 7 apex predator materialized in the arena. A nightmare creature designed by combining the deadliest traits of 100 different species into a single terrifying form. It stood 3 meters tall, with claws that could shred, armor and teeth that could crush bone, and eyes that glowed with artificial hunger. Most recruits faced this simulation by keeping distance and using ranged weapons to whittle down its health until it deactivated. Elena charged directly at it. "She is insane," the feathered instructor said flatly. "No being without heavy weaponry has ever attempted to engage the Predator simulation in close combat." The creature swiped at Elena with claws that moved faster than most eyes could track. But she had already ducked beneath the attack. Sliding on her knees across the smooth arena floor and coming up behind the beast's legs, she wrapped her arms around its throat from behind, her legs locking around its torso in a technique that humans called a rear naked choke, her entire body weight hanging from the creature's neck as it thrashed and roared and tried to reach her with its deadly claws. The Predator simulation was not programmed to handle this kind of attack. It expected ranged combat and tactical retreats and the careful application of superior firepower, not a small mammal clinging to its back like a parasite and slowly cutting off the blood flow to its brain. The holographic projection flickered and stuttered as its systems tried to calculate a response to an attack that had never been attempted before. "Her body temperature is rising," Golrek reported, reading data from the arena's medical sensors. "Her heart rate has increased by 300%, and her muscles are producing lactic acid at levels that should cause immediate failure. But she is still maintaining the hold. That is the adrenaline response you mentioned earlier," Morith said, with something approaching respect in his translated voice. "Her body is ignoring pain and fatigue signals in order to complete the task." The Predator simulation finally collapsed, its systems unable to cope with an attack that no one had anticipated. And Elena released her hold and rolled away as the hologram flickered and disappeared. She lay on the arena floor for a moment, her chest heaving as she sucked in oxygen to replace what her muscles had consumed, her entire body trembling with exhaustion that would have incapacitated most species for hours. Then she pushed herself back to her feet and looked up at the observation window with a smile on her face. "The simulation is not complete," Velith said. "There are still 3 more phases remaining, but everyone in the observation deck already knew what the outcome would be. They had watched a soft-skinned mammal with no weapons defeat combat drones and environmental hazards and predator simulations using nothing but her body and her brain, and her absolutely terrifying refusal to give up. Elena Vasquez was not weak at all. She was something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. A product of millions of years of evolution on a world that killed everything that could not adapt and overcome. The remaining phases of the simulation activated, and Elena faced each one with the same combination of creativity and determination and sheer stubborn will that had defined her species since they first climbed down from the trees and decided that they would not be prey. She would finish the crucible in less than half the expected time, and nothing in the galaxy would ever look at humans the same way again. The final combat drone fell to the arena floor with a crash of broken metal and sparking wires, its weapon systems destroyed by a human who had used its own severed arm as a bludgeon. And Elena Vasquez stood in the center of the devastation she had created, with blood dripping from a gash on her forearm and sweat soaking through her jumpsuit. The arena fell, silent as the simulation systems powered down. their programming unable to continue after every threat had been neutralized by a single unarmed combatant in the observation deck. No one spoke for a very long time. Instructor Moreth's 8 eyes remained fixed on the monitoring screens, watching the human as she bent over with her hands on her knees and drew deep breaths into her oxygen-starved lungs. 12 minutes and 37 seconds, Golrek finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. The standard completion time for a Class 4 simulation is 45 minutes with full armament. She completed it in less than a third of that time, the feathered instructor added. Without any weapons at all, Commander Valeth said nothing, his compound eyes processing what he had witnessed while his mind struggled to reconcile his previous assumptions about humans with the reality he had just observed. The other recruits had gathered at the arena's observation windows, drawn by rumors that something unprecedented was happening, and they watched Elena with expressions that ranged from disbelief to fear to something that might have been admiration. Kethel, the Vornkai warrior who had stood beside Elena in formation just hours ago, pressed one of his clawed hands against the transparent barrier and stared at the human with new understanding in his compound eyes. I thought she was weak, he said to no one in particular. I thought she was a joke, a political gesture that would wash out within the first week. We all thought that, replied the Desic competitor, her symbiont armor pulsing with agitated bioluminescence. We were all wrong. Elena straightened up and looked at the gash on her arm with clinical detachment, examining the wound as if it belonged to someone else entirely. And then she tore a strip of fabric from the bottom of her jumpsuit and wrapped it around the injury with practiced efficiency. Why is she not seeking medical attention? Asked one of the younger instructors. That wound requires treatment. Humans have remarkable regenerative capabilities for soft tissue injuries, Golrek explained, still reading from the biological database that had become his obsession over the past 12 minutes. Their blood contains clotting factors that seal wounds quickly, and their immune systems can fight off infections that would kill most species. But surely the pain must be affecting her performance. Pain affects human performance differently than it affects other species, and their brains can prioritize tasks over discomfort to a degree that our scientists are still trying to understand. Elena walked toward the arena exit with steady steps, her body moving with the same controlled grace she had displayed before the simulation began, despite the injuries and exhaustion that should have left her. Barely able to stand, she passed through the doors and found Commander Valeth waiting for her, his massive insectoid form blocking the corridor like a living wall. Specialist Vasquez, he said, and for the first time since she had arrived at the academy, his voice contained something other than dismissal or condescension. I believe we need to talk. Of course, Commander. Follow me to the medical bay first. That wound needs proper treatment regardless of your species' healing abilities. It is not necessary. Commander, I have had worse. The casual statement struck Valeth like a physical blow, because he suddenly realized that she was not boasting or exaggerating. She was simply stating a fact. This human had experienced injuries worse than a deep laceration from combat drone shrapnel, and she had survived them all, and she had continued fighting despite them. Nevertheless, Valeth insisted, Academy regulations require medical evaluation after combat simulations, and I will not make exceptions even for exceptional performances. Elena nodded and followed the commander through the corridors, passing clusters of recruits and instructors who stared at her with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Word had spread quickly through the academy, traveling at the speed of gossip through a closed community, and by the time they reached the medical bay, it seemed like everyone on Vareth Prime knew what the human had accomplished. The medical officer was a being of pure energy, contained within a specially designed environmental suit. its form shifting and flickering as it examined Elena's wound with sensors that could detect damage at the cellular level. "Remarkable," the medical officer said as it worked. "Your tissue is already beginning to repair itself at the wound site, and I am detecting elevated levels of growth factors and inflammatory mediators that are accelerating the healing process." "That is normal for humans," Elena replied with a slight shrug. "We heal fast when we need to. I am also detecting microfractures in 3 of your metacarpal bones," the medical officer continued. "Consistent with repeated high-impact strikes against hard surfaces. Did you punch the combat drones?" "When I could not find anything else to hit them with, yes." Valeth watched the exchange with growing amazement, because Elena was discussing injuries that would have ended most warriors' careers as if they were minor inconveniences. "The fractures will require rest and possibly splinting," the medical officer advised. "How long until I can use the hand for combat?" "For most species, injuries like this would require several weeks of recovery. But based on what I am reading about human bone regeneration," the medical officer paused and consulted its database with a flickering of energy, "your bones will actually become stronger at the fracture sites after they heal, which is not a property shared by any other known sentient species." "I know," Elena said. "Humans call it the Wolf's Law response. Our bodies reinforce damaged structures with additional bone density." Valeth felt something shift in his understanding of the galaxy. A fundamental recalibration of everything he thought he knew about combat and strength and what it meant to be a warrior. He had spent 2 centuries training the deadliest beings from across known space, and he had never encountered a species that became stronger from being injured. "Specialist Vasquez," he said carefully, "I would like to review your performance data and discuss your training placement. But I suspect that the standard tracks will not be appropriate for someone with your particular skill set." "I understand, Commander." "No, I do not think you do," Valeth replied. "I am not considering a remedial placement. I am considering something that has never been done before in the history of this academy." Elena looked at him with her brown, human eyes, waiting patiently for him to continue. "I am considering creating a new training track specifically designed around human capabilities, with you as both the first subject and the primary architect of the curriculum." The medical officer's energy form flickered with what might have been surprise, and Elena tilted her head slightly in the human gesture that indicated thoughtful consideration. "You want me to teach as well as learn? I want you to help us understand what humanity is capable of, because I suspect that what we witnessed today was only a fraction of your true potential." Elena was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant as she considered the implications of the commander's offer. "On Earth, we have a saying," she finally said. "We say that you do not truly understand something until you can teach it to someone else. Then you accept?" "I accept, Commander, but I should warn you that human training methods can be quite intense, and many of my fellow recruits may find them challenging. After what I witnessed today, I believe challenging is exactly what this academy needs." The medical officer finished treating Elena's wounds and declared her fit for light duty, and Valeth escorted her back to her quarters with a new appreciation for the soft-skinned mammal who walked beside him. Word of his decision spread through the academy even faster than the news of her performance, and by the next morning, every recruit and instructor knew that the human was no longer a diplomatic formality. She was something entirely new, a bridge between 2 very different approaches to warfare, and she was going to change everything they thought they knew about combat in her quarters that night. Elena reviewed the academy's training materials and began making notes about modifications and additions that would be necessary to bring human methods into the curriculum. She wrote about endurance training and pain management and the psychological aspects of combat that the coalition seemed to have neglected in favor of technological superiority. She wrote about improvised weapons and environmental awareness and the importance of never giving up no matter how hopeless a situation appeared, and she smiled, because she knew that humanity had finally found its place among the stars, not as the weakest species, not as a diplomatic afterthought, but as the survivors, the adapters, the ones who refused to die no matter what the universe threw at them. The galaxy had no idea what was coming, and Elena could not wait to show them. The Academy Council chamber had not seen a full emergency session in nearly 3 decades. Not since the crystalline hegemony's civil war had threatened to spill across coalition borders. But tonight every seat was filled with representatives from species that had traveled across the galaxy to witness what promised to be a historic decision. Commander Valeth stood at the central podium, his compound eyes sweeping across the assembled dignitaries and military officials, who waited in tense silence for him to speak. Distinguished members of the council, he began, his voice carrying the weight of 2 centuries of combat experience. I have called this session to address a matter of urgent importance to the Coalition's military doctrine and training protocols. We have received reports of the humans' performance, said Admiral Threshnak, a massive crustacean being whose shell bore the ceremonial markings of 100 successful campaigns. But surely one individual's exceptional showing does not warrant such dramatic measures. With respect, Admiral, I believe it does. Valeth activated the chamber's holographic display, and the recording of Elena's crucible performance began playing above the council table, drawing gasps and exclamations from beings who had not yet seen the footage. They watched her dodge plasma fire and improvise weapons from debris and strangle a predator simulation with her bare hands. And by the time the recording ended, the chamber had fallen completely silent. 12 minutes and 37 seconds, Valeth said. Unarmed, unarmored, and utilizing combat techniques that our databases have no equivalent for. How is this possible? Asked a delegate from the Feathered Dominions. Humans have no natural weapons, no defensive capabilities, no enhanced senses or reflexes that we are aware of. That is precisely what I believed before today. But I have spent the past several hours reviewing everything the Coalition knows about humanity and their homeworld, and I have reached some conclusions that I believe the Council needs to hear. Valeth pulled up new data on the display, charts and graphs and biological analyses that painted a picture of a species unlike any other in known space. Humans evolved on a Category 12 death world, he explained. Their planet has extreme temperature variations, constant seismic activity, atmospheric electrical storms, predators that can run faster than most vehicles, and an oxygen-rich atmosphere that is actually corrosive to most carbon-based life. We knew they came from a harsh environment, Admiral Threshnak rumbled. But how does that translate to combat effectiveness? Because humans did not become dominant through natural weapons or armor. They became dominant through adaptation and persistence and an absolutely relentless refusal to accept defeat. Valeth highlighted specific data points as he continued his explanation. Their cardiovascular systems can sustain physical exertion for hours or even days, allowing them to literally chase prey until it collapses from exhaustion. A hunting technique they call persistence predation. Their neurological systems can temporarily suppress pain signals during times of stress, allowing them to continue fighting through injuries that would incapacitate any other species. Their bones actually become stronger after healing from fractures, and their immune systems can adapt to fight off pathogens they have never encountered before. Their brains are wired for pattern recognition and improvisation, allowing them to see potential weapons and tools in ordinary objects and to develop new tactics in real time during combat. And perhaps most importantly, Valeth paused to let his words sink in. Humans have been at war with each other, continuously for their entire recorded history. and they have developed combat techniques specifically designed to kill other humans, who are themselves Category 12 organisms. The council chamber erupted in murmured conversations as the implications of this information began to settle in. "What you are describing," said the Feathered Dominion's delegate slowly, "is not a weak species that requires protection. It is an apex predator that has been masquerading as prey." "Exactly." Admiral Freshnack leaned forward, his massive claws clicking against the table surface. "What do you propose we do with this information, Commander?" "I propose that we completely restructure our understanding of human integration into coalition forces. And I propose that we begin by changing Specialist Vasquez's role from student to instructor." "You want a human to teach at the academy?" asked a skeptical voice from the back of the chamber. "I want us to learn from humanity before we have to face them as enemies," Valith replied with grim honesty. "Because if what I have seen today is representative of their species' capabilities, then we are fortunate beyond measure that they chose to join the coalition rather than oppose it." The council voted unanimously to approve Valeth's proposal. 3 days later, Elena Vasquez stood before her first class of coalition recruits, a mixed group of beings from 15 different worlds who had volunteered to participate in the new Human Integration Training Program. Frol was among them, the Voronkai warrior who had once dismissed her as a joke, and he stood at attention with a new respect in his compound eyes. "The first thing you need to understand," Elena said as she paced before the assembled recruits, "is that I am not going to teach you how to fight like humans, because most of you lack the biological equipment for that. Then, what will you teach us?" asked a crystalline being whose surface reflected the training room's lights in rainbow patterns. "I am going to teach you how to think like humans, how to see potential in everything around you, how to refuse to give up even when the situation seems hopeless, and how to turn your weaknesses into strengths." She held up her hands, showing them to the recruits. "Look at these. No claws, no venom, no armor. Just soft skin and fragile bones to break if I punch something too hard. How is that a strength?" asked the Thessic competitor. "Because I know my hands can break. So I learned to strike in ways that minimize damage to myself while maximizing damage to my opponent. I learned to use tools and weapons because my natural equipment was insufficient. And I learned to think creatively because I could never rely on brute force alone." Elena began walking among the recruits, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "Humans survived on Earth, not because we were the strongest or the fastest or the most dangerous. We survived because we were the most adaptable. We could live in any environment and eat almost anything and recover from injuries that would have ended most species. And we survived because we never, ever gave up." She stopped in front of Kethral and looked up at the massive warrior who towered over her. "You have natural weapons that could cut me in half with a single blow. But what do you do when those weapons are damaged or restrained?" "I would retreat and seek medical attention," Kethral admitted. "A human would bite, or headbutt, or spit in your eyes, or grab a rock or a piece of debris, or do whatever else was necessary to keep fighting until the threat was eliminated or escape became possible. That seems desperate. It is desperate. And desperation is one of humanity's greatest assets. Because a desperate human is more dangerous than almost anything else in the Fios galaxy." The training session continued for several hours, with Elena demonstrating techniques that the recruits had never imagined and explaining concepts that challenged their fundamental understanding of combat. She taught them about psychological warfare and intimidation and the importance of making an enemy believe that you cannot be defeated, even when you are on the verge of collapse. She taught them about endurance and pacing and how to conserve energy for the moments when it would be most needed. She taught them about improvisation and environmental awareness, and the art of turning any object into a weapon, and she taught them about humanity's secret weapon, the one that no database had fully captured and no analysis could adequately explain. She taught them about hope on Earth. We have stories about heroes who faced impossible odds and won through sheer determination and the refusal to accept defeat, Elena said as the session drew to a close. These stories are not just entertainment. They are how we teach our young that giving up is never an option. We believe that any problem can be solved if you work hard enough and think creatively enough and never stop trying. And that belief has carried our species from cave-dwelling primitives to a spacefaring civilization in the blink of an evolutionary eye. That is what I am really here to teach you. Not how to fight like humans, but how to believe like humans. The recruits filed out of the training room with thoughtful expressions and new perspectives. And Commander Velith watched from the observation deck above. "She is remarkable," Morath said, standing beside the commander with his 8 eyes fixed on the human below. "I have never seen recruits respond so positively to an instructor on the first day." "She is not remarkable," Velith corrected him. "She is human, and that is far more significant than we ever realized." "What do you mean?" "I mean that we have spent centuries believing that combat effectiveness was determined by natural weapons and technological superiority. But humans have shown us that the most important factor is something else entirely." "What factor is that?" Velith watched as Elena gathered her training materials and prepared to leave the room, moving with the same quiet confidence she had displayed since the moment she arrived at the academy. "The will to survive," he said. "The absolute refusal to accept defeat under any circumstances, no matter how hopeless the situation appears." He turned to face Morath with something approaching concern in his compound eyes. "We should be very grateful that humanity chose to be our allies, because if they had decided to be our enemies instead, I am not certain we could have stopped them in the training room below." Elena Vasquez smiled as she headed back to her quarters. It was going to be a very interesting year at the academy, and she had so much more to teach them about what humanity could really do. The galaxy was about to learn that the soft-skinned mammals from the little blue planet were not the weakest species in known space. They were the ones that everything else should be afraid of, and they were just getting started.